Hello, everybody. When I got the invitation, I was really delighted because I do have actually, believe it or not, a link with Liverpool because my mother's family are Liverpool Irish and my mother was second generation, so I'm like third generation. And I lived in Wallasey as a teenager. I actually grew up in the Midlands, then Wallasey, a little bit the Midlands, and then London's been my home. And when I chose this T-shirt, or whatever you call it, top, I didn't realise the red link here. But even more important, and I don't follow football, but my cousin last night went to a certain match, and he was absolutely delighted when he got home. So I thought, well, actually, red is quite a useful colour. But I didn't realise how close Everton and Liverpool football grounds were. They're literally on the other side of the road. So I was asking the cab driver, what happens when they both play at home? Oh. That doesn't happen, apparently. Anyway, so it's a real delight to come and give this lecture. Now, there are a fair number of slides in this presentation, and I realise it's a bit over the time when we were due to start. But Julie, where's Julie? Very kindly said that there's possibility, well, certainly to contact her, because I'm going to probably jump over a few slides, because I daren't keep you from your lunch. But I mean, is it one prompt, the buffet? But but I won't. So when must it finish? When do you want to do your closing remarks?
I'd aim for 1 week.
That's fine. Okay. So Julie has said that if you want to have an opportunity to get access to this presentation, to contact her, and possibly it might be on the intranet at some point. So is that okay when I rush over certain points? So how I've divided this presentation is, what do we actually know? What is really well known about Mary Seacole? And then the second part of the presentation is, what new knowledge has emerged literally in the last few years to sort of update us. So I'm focusing on information that it's not my knowledge, it's not my discoveries, but Mary Seacole was born, we think, in 1805. So in 2005, the bicentenary was celebrated, and I was still working then, and the Royal College of Nursing invited me to do a short monograph, this publication. And so I set aside quite a bit of time to sort of pull together what information would be of particular use to student nurses and nurses. And so I'm drawing on the information there as part of the course. And then in the second part of the presentation, there's actually been a paper published literally this year in the Journal of Advanced Nursing, of which I was one of the co-authors. In fact, virtually all the actual new findings came from these two authors, who I'll talk to you about later. So that's how I want to set it out. So where have we got information in terms of the established knowledge about Mary Seacole? Well, first and foremost is her autobiography that she wrote in 1857. And other authors, such as Alexis Swire, this is his yellow autobiography. He was another volunteer. Obviously, we know Florence Nightingale was a volunteer. Having said that, she was really sponsored by the government, but she would have done it as a volunteer, I think, as well, in terms of nursing in the Crimean War. But Alexis Swire was a French chef who was horrified when he heard that the British soldiers had dreadful food, dreadful nutrition. And so he, in his autobiography, he wrote both about Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, which was very useful for me because when I was writing the short history, one of the things I realised was nobody had written very much about, did Mary Seacole know Florence Nightingale, vice versa? What did they think about each other? So that's, I should say, that's probably the most original bit in that publication. So what do we know about Mary? If there was just one slide, this would be it. That we, as I said, we think she was born in 1805, but we definitely know that she died in London in 1881, 14th of May. So in fact, it's just 2 days after the birthday of Florence Nightingale. As we know, International Nurses' Day is in celebration of Florence Nightingale's birthday initially, and of course it's broadened out, as Hayley mentioned, to embrace this whole international perspective on nursing. So we know that she was a doctress and a nurse, a businesswoman, a herbalist. She was a part of her business enterprises were running boarding houses. She cooked, she travelled. Towards the end of her life, when she settled in London, she was a masseuse to the then Princess of Wales at Marlborough House, and she also wrote her autobiography. Now, I'm of mixed, as you can obviously, I've talked to you about the Irish bit, and the other side of me, which is more visible probably, is actually my Nigerian origins. So, is that me beeping, or so it must have been mentioned. That's all right. No, don't worry. Thanks. So, I have obviously got many reasons why I'm interested in Mary Seacole, but I have to say that's something usually attracts us to something because of our own backgrounds, doesn't it? So this dual heritage of Mary Seacole I find quite interesting. And what I love about her writing in her autobiography is she's very proud of both sides of her heritage. She's proud of her Scottish origins and she's proud of her African Jamaican origins. And these are just quotes from her autobiography about her father being from a military, old Scottish family, and that's where she got her interest in all aspects military, whereas her mother was very much in the footsteps that Mary took as well, boarding house keeper and a Creole woman. And Creole means different things in the vocabulary of the Caribbean. It does mean people of mixed ethnic heritage, usually white European and African Jamaican in this case. But it also applies if you had you could have lived in the Caribbean for a long time as a white European, for example, or you could have had some ethnic mixture, if you like, going back a few generations. So it's not clear exactly what Mary Seacole's mother's ethnic heritage was in terms of her mother and her father, because all Mary tells us is that she was Creole. Now, we hear about the fact that she's a doctress, and if you Google the term doctress, Mary Seacole comes up now as the sort of like the most famous doctress. But actually, there was somebody before Mary Seacole, and she was called Cuba Cornwallis, who was born as a slave in Jamaica and died in 1848. And she was well known because some eminent people in British history who were involved in the Caribbean in one way or another were looked after by her, and were so impressed with her care. And here's a couple of examples. Lord Nelson and Prince William, who later became William IV. And there's a nice story about King William IV's wife, Queen Adelaide, who was so impressed with the accounts of how her husband valued the care of Cuba, that she sent her this gorgeous gown from England to Jamaica. But Cuba didn't want to wear it until she was dead. So it was actually her funerary gown. So that was quite sweet, really. So I'm drawing quite a bit from Mary's autobiography, but I'm also going to be drawing from some independent accounts about Mary Seacole as well. But here she's explaining that she was both a skillful nurse and a doctress, and where she really got her experience from, because of course we do know, as Hayley alluded to, that the profession of nursing as we know now, in terms of the training, as it was, education of nurses, really the first recognised school of nursing in this country was the 1860 Nightingale School of Nursing at St Thomas's, and that was after the Crimean War. And of course, I wouldn't dare leave this building without saying that the second School of Nursing was established in Liverpool in 1863 by William Rathbone, which you all knew, didn't you? Yeah. I like a bit of history about our profession. I think it is useful to be illustrated. And of course, William Rathbone was so famous for the development of district nursing, wasn't he? So anyway, so it's because some people say, well, Mary wasn't a trained nurse, was she? Well, you wouldn't have been a trained nurse in Britain at that period, never mind in Jamaica. So I just thought I'd address that issue. And her skills as a nurse and as a supervisor of nursing, Hayley, you mentioned leadership, was recognised. Of course, Jamaica was a British colony at this time. It was part of the colonial empire at that point, of course. And the medical authorities at the headquarters of the British military in Kingston, Jamaica, called upon Mary to bring along some of her nurses and supervise nursing of the care of patients affected by the yellow fever epidemic of 1853. So just to give you an example there. Now, Mary travelled a great deal in her life, and she talks about how she longingly, as a young woman, looked at the globe and wanted to travel to England, which she did twice in her youth, before she made the famous trip where she was offering her services to nurse in the Crimean War. But you can see she visited Haiti, Cuba, Panama, Bahamas, Belgium and Ireland. So she was, and we're thinking about, I used to love it when I taught student nurses. I'm a bit cheeky, So, it's before aeroplanes were around, and look at how far she travelled in those days. And one of the other areas that she became well known for was when she went to Panama. Now, she went to Panama more as a businesswoman. It was a gold prospecting town, and her brother was there. But she ended up coping single-handedly with a cholera epidemic when the doctor fled, and the dentist, who they called one, well, the poor dentist, it wasn't his area, really. So she just rolled up her sleeves. And that's, again, what I like from a nursing perspective. You see a need, don't wait for others, just get on and show some leadership. And the similarities I felt with Florence Nightingale with this Panama experience was she recounts in her autobiography being called to a sort of poor hovel of a house, struck by cholera. And as she walks in, the stench, the odour, the filth, the lack of ventilation really struck her. So she had rolled up her sleeves, but she also organised the family to help in cleaning up that place in order that the patients could have some chance of recovery, and ensured clean water, etc. Now, we quite rightly acknowledge Florence Nightingale's huge contribution in that, and Notes on Nursing, of course, would tell us about that. And here Mary wasn't sort of waving a flag about this, but I picked this up as a nurse thinking, hey, that is interesting, isn't it? Because that's what we all do, yes, if we see those elements that we know are going to sort of block recovery. Now, identity. Mary, as I've said, was very proud of who she was. And if you read her autobiography, it comes out in about 5 different sections of it. I've just chosen a few ones. In this Cruces, this Panama gold-digging town, the Americans were so pleased at the way Mary had cared for them that they invited her to the American Independence Day dinner that they were having as their guest. And I don't put Mary Seacole on any sort of pedestal. I don't put anybody on a pedestal. We've all got warts, haven't we, and all. And so she's acknowledging a little bit here. If I have a little prejudice with certain people she didn't like, read the book. It's against our cousins across the Atlantic. So the Americans come in for some criticism here. She doesn't say all of them, actually, in her book, but I have a few shades of deeper brown upon my skin, which shows me related, and I am proud of the relationship to those poor mortals whom you once held enslaved. That's aimed at her British readers. This is 1857. As we know, full abolition of slavery from the sort of British perspective in Jamaica was 1838. And then she says, and whose bodies America still owns. Because if we know the history of America, it wasn't abolished until after the Civil War, 1865. So she's making a few digs in a very nice Victorian, polite way. And having this bond and knowing what slavery is, having seen with my eyes and heard with my ears proof positive enough of its horrors, let others affect to doubt them if they will. Is it surprising that I should be somewhat impatient of the airs of superiority which many Americans have endeavoured to assume over me? Now, what's coming out of these words is the feistiness of Mary. And I think, sorry, senior managers, but I think all nurses should have a bit of feistiness in them, yeah? You have my permission, right. So, this is a lovely story of how she addresses this issue because of something that was said in a toast at this dinner to Mary. So it was all meant in goodwill by this American who gets up and gives her a toast, but ends it, unfortunately, by saying, if we could bleach her by any means, we would, and thus make her as acceptable in any company as she deserves to be. Whoa, she was sitting next to her brother Edward, and obviously steam was coming out of her ears everywhere. And he's calming her down, saying, Mary, remember we're guests here, please. She obviously could be quite rude, maybe. So in her response, as part of it, she said at the end, I must say I don't altogether appreciate your friend's kind wishes with respect to my complexion. As to the society which the process might gain me admission into, all I can say is that judging from the specimens I've met here and elsewhere, I don't think that I should lose much by being excluded from it. So, gentlemen, I drink to you and the general reformation of American manners. Wonderful stuff, wonderful. So anyway, let's go. So I've talked about that she was also proud of her Scottish origins, and she talks about, as you can see here, I won't read it all, Scotch blood coursing in my veins. And this was a very interesting comment by the war illustrator in his autobiography, which wasn't published till 1903, about his meeting, and he did this sketch of Mary Seacole, and meeting her. So he talks about Mrs. Seacole, an elderly mulatto, obviously mixed woman from Jamaica, was a well-known character in the Crimean. All the soldiers and sailors knew her. She had a taste for nursing and doctoring, but she added to this a business as a sutler. You know, the sutlers were the precursor to NAFI. They provided the refreshments and they followed the camp. She told me that she had Scotch blood in her veins. I must say that she did not look like it, but the old lady spoke proudly of this point in her genealogy. So that's what I mean. She's proud of both aspects of, and of course we have to have that inner confidence, whatever issues we might be a bit anxious about in terms of our own person, to just survive in this life. Now, the Crimean War, what was the issue about poor nursing care? Well, of course, it was brought to the attention by the Times. There were several Times war correspondents. This is the first one I'll be referring to, Thomas Chenery. And he wrote this searing, scathing account of how badly the British soldiers were being treated in comparison with the French, for example. I'm not going to read it all, but you can pick up that he's also addressing the poor nursing care. And he's saying the medical arrangements are extremely good. Compare it with the French. The surgeons more numerous, and they have also the help of the Sisters of Charity, who have accompanied the expedition in incredible numbers. These devoted women are excellent nurses. We look right at the beginning. He's talking about this because in terms of the British soldiers, there's no dressers or nurses to carry out the surgeon's directions and to attend on the sick during the intervals between his visits. And as you, I'm sure all nursing particularly would be aware, that this scandal hit the British press and it ultimately brought down the then Secretary of State for War. Because, of course, their sons had been marching proudly in their scarlet uniforms off to the Crimean War. And then they heard that they weren't even dying from bullets. They were dying from malnutrition and poor, infections and just poor care. healthcare. So Florence Nightingale was charged with going out to the Crimea with a group of nurses to start sorting this out. And Mary heard about this. She was actually on her way to London to sort out some gold shares. She thought somebody was diddling her a bit. So she thought, well, she would combine this with offering her services to go out. So she made up her mind. If the army wanted nurses, they'd be glad of me. And I decided that I would go to the Crimea. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about this, that Florence Nightingale personally turned Mary Seacole down. That wasn't the case at all. Because by the time Mary Seacole arrived in England in the autumn of 1854, Florence Nightingale had set out 2 days earlier with this first group of 38 nurses out to the Crimea. Mary came along with her references, etc. And this is probably one of the most poignant parts of Mary Seacole's autobiography, because she was a mother. She saw herself as a daughter of the British Empire. Father was Scottish. Jamaica was ruled by the British. She nursed all these British soldiers, and she saw herself as British. She was in that context. So she comes to London and she experiences rejection from 5 quarters. And this is the time she's depressed. You can read her depression. It leaps out at you from her pages. And what might be the relevance today? Well, she actually describes going for one of these interviews. And okay, it was with Miss Nightingale's companion. She said they didn't have any vacancies. Okay. But she also added that had there been a vacancy, I should not have been chosen to fill it. So you're starting to get this first inkling that Mary's not too sure about whether she's really wanted in certain quarters. She goes outside this big house in Belgrave Square. Dark, starting to rain. She thinks to herself, did these ladies shrink from accepting my aid because my blood flowed beneath a somewhat duskier skin than theirs? Tears streamed down my foolish cheeks as I stood in the fast-thinning streets, tears of grief that any should doubt my motives, that heaven should deny me the opportunity that I sought. And this is what I love about Mary Seacole. Yeah, we're all hit, aren't we, by injustice, trauma in our lives. How the heck do we get out of these incidents? And what she said was, what might happen to the Crimea, I would go. If I had no other way, then would I, upon my own responsibility, at my own cost. I won't go into the rest of the quote, but basically she's saying, I will sort this out myself. I'm going to get out to the Crimea. And she says, if the authorities had allowed me, I would willingly have given them my services as a nurse. But as they declined them, should I not open a hotel for invalids in the Crimea in my own way? So she paid for her own passage, went out to the Crimea. On the left is what Mary wanted to do. That was to set up a hotel. But it didn't quite work out. She set up this sort of, she called it the British Hotel, but it ended up, she didn't have accommodation there. She put people up occasionally overnight. But it was more to provide food, storage, and a nursing dispensary. But she also went out to the battlefield and nursed the soldiers both on the battlefield and in their huts near the battlefield. So, now, there's a lot in here, but it's just to show you there were independent accounts of Mary Seacole's activities that were reported in the British media. And one I like by another Times war correspondent, Sir William Howard Russell. I've seen her go down under fire with her little store of creature comforts for our wounded men, and a more tender or skillful hand about a wound or a broken limb could not be found amongst our best surgeons. And how she was at some of the battles there. So I won't go into all of it. Now, the Crimean War ended very, very quickly, suddenly, with the siege of Sebastopol being overcome. And she and her business partner had bought in lots of supplies which were no longer needed. So she came back to London, and she was made bankrupt. Now, when the journalists, she had a lot of friends that were in journalism, that you can see from the coverage, they started to report about this. Now, the soldiers loved her, the military loved her. She even got supporters within the royal family. people were horrified that Mary Seacole was broke. So all sorts of fundraising testaments were held. And this is one example. A 4-day military gala on the banks of the River Thames. Over 4 days, 80,000 people attended. Now, unfortunately, the promoter lost a lot of the money, so she didn't make very much. But when I was showing this slide during the Olympics year, somebody pointed out that the Millennium Stadium, that huge, gorgeous stadium where so many medals were won, accommodates 80,000 people. So that gave me an idea of the amounts of people that came. And let's talk about this. She wrote her autobiography in 1857, which I've referred to. Coming to the end of what we know about her. She died on the 14th of May from apoplexy, stroke, and in her will, she requested to be buried in the Catholic cemetery in Kensal Green in London. And she actually had an obituary in the Times newspaper as well as the Jamaican Daily Gleaner. So I'm going to rush now because I'm watching. How am I doing, Madam Chair? So that's some of what we knew. And as you can see from this quote, people weren't aware of maybe what Seacole was doing after the war, etc. And there is quite a lot of information now about that. So Corrie and Jerome are very good friends of mine now, and they're both ambassadors of the Mary Seacole Appeal as well. Corrie is a lecturer in nursing in Holland, and her husband is a retired mathematician and scientist. They had a great interest in Florence Nightingale, and they've got a military historian friend, a naval historian friend in London. They came to see him 10 years ago, and he said to them, I was talking about Florence Nightingale, what was new. And he said, but by the way, have you heard about somebody called Mary Seacole? No. They went back, dug up, and my goodness, they've become the experts in Mary Seacole. Absolutely incredible, using their own resources to sort of dig out information. So this was in my plumper days, see here? Slimming World, by the way. So this was when Corrie published the Dutch edition of Mary Seacole's autobiography with lots of new information. We won't have time to. Now, this is the article that's been published in the Journal of Advanced Nursing. I'm going to go through just a few findings, which basically there was much, much more media coverage, both in Britain, but also across particularly the colonial media than has been realised. So in Australia, and in New Zealand. These are sort of new facts that have come out. And nobody was aware that another fund had been set up, fundraised in New Zealand. I thought that was quite interesting. The other aspect is the medals. Again, there's some debate. Was Mary Seacole, was she wearing dress medals, or did she ever earn any of the medals you see her wearing in the portraits? There are 2 medals that are housed in Jamaica as Mary Seacole medals. One is the French Légion d'honneur, and the other one, I'm sure there are military people in the audience. There we go. That's the Turkish medal, and this is the French Légion d'honneur. And medal experts have looked at these medals and said they're not dress medals, they are the real medals. So that's interesting. But the provenance of how she obtained them was not clear. And it's Corrie and Jerome, excuse me, who sat in the British Library and came up a few years ago with British media coverage, quite widespread, of Mary Seacole being awarded a Turkish medal. So at last there's some information about one. I'll move on a little bit. The other area that they learnt more about is that after the Crimean War, Mary Seacole desperately wanted to go to India. Now, there was a bit of knowledge about that. But what they did uncover, there's 2 things I want to talk about very quickly, was this letter from a nurse in the late war. That was the Crimean War. This letter was published in 1857, and Crimean War finished in 1856, yeah? And I won't read it all, but she's written to the press because she wants to... This newspaper had a campaign, why don't we have more British nurses going out to India, as in Crimea? And she said that she'd offered and they turned it down. But she also said, I've also heard that 40 ladies, myself amongst the rest, have offered their services to Mrs. Seacole. This is brand new, and nobody knew this. So anyway, let's move on. That's the letter that they discovered as well. Mary Seacole writing to an eminent British military person. You can read all of this on the intranet, hopefully, at some point. Let's move on. This, now we're coming to the last couple of slides. I hope you'll see why there's this campaign to get a statue of her. There isn't one statue of her in the world. And so Lord Clive Soley, who was then an MP, when the late Mrs. Connie Mark said, she's only got a grave, don't you think she deserves better than that? And the grave was in his constituency. He said, yeah, when I've got a bit of time, I'll set up this statue appeal, which he did. See how long it's been going? It became a registered charity in 2004. Well, we're nearly there. We really are. It's going to be in the grounds of St Thomas's Hospital, and she has no links with St Thomas's Hospital, but the Trust said she represents black and minority ethnic contribution to their hospital, and they also serve a diverse area. That's why they've given the site. And we've got a wonderful sculptor, Martin Jennings, who's doing it. We needed to raise £500,000. Like you, I'm thinking, what? Why do you need so much money for a statue? I've started to learn, because it's a 10-foot bronze statue, blah, 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 blah. And all we now need to raise is £80,000. But those of you that can do arithmetic can work out how much money we've raised. Yeah, we've raised quite a lot. But we now urgently need to raise this last tranche of funding, because the clay statue has been done, and it's now at the foundry, and we need to pay the bill. That's why you've got on your, and we know people haven't got much money, but if you'd like to text us anything for £1, that's what you've got on your seat. Or if you'd like to be a bit more generous, and well, everybody's generous. £1 is generous, so we take back what I'm saying. But if you feel you'd like to give a bit more, you could go online to our Just Giving site and give as little as £2 onwards. This is the last slide. Always like to do a family link. This is my gorgeous little granddaughter. And in the grounds of St Thomas's last year, summer, they did a plaque ceremony. You know, they put this notice up on the site where Mary's statue is going to be. And it will be the first statue to a named black woman in the UK. I mean, I think it's important that it's going to be a statue to a nurse, actually, and a woman. Not many women statues. I wonder why. Never mind, we're going to have a woman statue, you know, and it's going to be on this site. And I'm very excited. Thank you.
Thank you, that was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I learned quite a lot I didn't know about Mary Seacole.
Thank you.
Can I just open the floor up to questions? Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask Elizabeth?
Can I just ask, she seems very sort of well-read and educated.
Yes.
Was that the norm, sort of the background she came from, or do you think she went forward to educate herself?
There was a very, very small minority of free, we'd call them black or mixed heritage or Creole, whatever. And of course, if these are children of either the plantation owners and the whatever, or the military links, as we've seen here. We don't, unfortunately, she doesn't give us much information about her upbringing. We hear of a grandmother figure, but there's no doubt, because there were questions asked, could she even write? Did she write her own autobiography? You know, there were questions like that. It's clear that she had an education. What we don't know is, where did she get that education from? Was it from her father, her mother? Where did she? But she was certainly literate. Because all the writings of the 4 letters now that we know she's written and her will, all are in this exactly the same handwriting. So the fact that she was literate tells us, doesn't it, that she... But I don't have the answer to that. Yeah.
Did she have any of her own family, and are there any living relatives?
That's interesting again. There's lots of... I hope there's some budding historians or historians in the audience, because there's quite a few blank areas. She doesn't talk about children. She married her English husband quite late in life, Edward, oh I love this, Edward Horatio Hamilton Seacole. Now what does that tell you? There's two stories. One is that he was the illegitimate son of Lord Nelson and, what's his wife's name? Sorry, I've forgotten. Lady Hamilton. Oh, come on, you've got to help me out here. Come on. Come on, all this. Or, and this is the oral history through a line of the family that I'll mention in a minute, that he was the godson of Lord Nelson. In fact, that's in her will, where she says she bequeaths a ring, I think, that was given to her late husband by his godfather, Lord Nelson. Now, we don't think there were any children, but Florence Nightingale, in a private correspondence, alludes to the fact that she feels that Mary Seacole had a daughter by a Colonel Bunbury in Jamaica. I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you? But a lot of people called Mrs. Seacole Mother Seacole or Auntie Seacole, and she had a maid with her who used to call her Mother Seacole. So even Alexis Swire wondered if this was her daughter. We don't think she had any children. She was very generous in her will to relatives, and yet there's no child mentioned. The brother-in-law of Mary, so a Seacole on the English side, there is a descendant, Noel Seacole, lives in the Oxford area, and he's one of our ambassadors. So that's the closest we've got, but we think there must be some descendants, not maybe direct, but from her side of the family or whatever. I think it's right.
Are we still finding information out about her, or do you think that a lot of the information we already know?
No. If we're still finding information about Florence Nightingale, which we are, well, not me, but you know what I'm hoping is people find stuff in their attics as the profile of Mary Seacole gets higher. Oh yeah. So I think we're going to hear a lot more, and I think even more after the statue is up, because that will really give it a huge profile. What do you think about Mary Seacole? Yeah. So that's why there are lots of areas that we need to know about Mary Seacole. Yeah.
What do you think it is that we can do as a nursing profession to try and raise her profile? I know we've got things like the Mary Seacole programme with the Leadership Academy.
That's true, which is nothing to do with the appeal, but we're delighted it's called after Mary Seacole. Yeah. There's lots of things. Yeah. There's a lot of things that don't cost money. That's first and foremost, because I know I want your money, but I know. And social media has a very important role. There's a Facebook page about Mary Seacole. Twitter, you've probably seen. So, by the way, we're just about 100 short on our Twitter account of reaching 4,000 followers. Would any of you who's on Twitter think about it? Or any of you on Facebook? Let's find more people on Facebook. Join us on our Facebook page. Obviously, the most important thing is to learn as much as you can about Mary Seacole and make up your own minds what you think is useful in terms of the nursing profession. Where would you, it's so much easier. I know I'm grey-haired, so I'm going to bellyache a bit. It's so much easier to access. Come on, Google. You will come across a debate about her, because there's this tiny core people who, and that's the way you would find with any individual. That's normal. That's healthy debate. That's the most probably important thing. But also know about our other nursing icons. We know quite rightly about Florence Nightingale. We hopefully know more about Edith Cavell. And of course, it's a very important centenary this year of her murder in the First World War. Any Welsh people here? Come on, there has to be a few Welsh. Come on. Betsy Cadwallader, the Welsh nurse in the Crimean War, because, as Hayley mentioned, the Crimean War, we know from a nursing room, was a very unique point in history. So I think to be able to talk about our history with different people, not just one person, but all these other people that contributed, and maybe read her autobiography. There's 19 chapters in it, but it's a good read. I hope I've given you a taste. And pick out for yourself what you feel would be relevant for the nursing profession. I think that's, first of all, learning about her yourself. not, you know, as I said, we shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal. Nobody, you know, whether it's Florence or Betsy or Mary, but we should be proud of some aspects of our nursing history. How I got into nursing history, if I can just maybe finish off with this, was when I talking to student nurses when I spent 2/3 of my career in the NHS and then a third, the latter part in the university. And as you can see, I like talking. I was talking to the student nurses and I just mentioned something. It was nothing to do with history. And I just realised they were looking at me, as sometimes they do. And I said, well, do you not know about, I think it was something about Florence Nightingale. And I realised they weren't really taught very much about nursing history. And so it got me interested in, and then I learned about Mary Seacole. What can we learn? Why are they so interesting? But also, I keep going on about this, but warts and all, you know. I think both if Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole are alive today, and Betsy Cadwallader, oh my God, they'd be giving Simon Stevens they'd be giving poor Jane Cummings, you know, I love Jane Cummings, I do actually admire what she's trying to do with nursing. But they were good, they were all very good, because why? They were interested in the patient. They used their initiative. They were prepared to stand up to other nurses and other disciplines in terms of the care of the patient. But they were prepared to roll their sleeves up and not be even in leadership positions, to get stuck in when they could see that the nurses around them were overwhelmed with work. So I think there's so many aspects. Sorry, that's a long answer, but I hope it's giving you some ideas. But go online and donate to Mary Seacole Structure. Sorry.
But what I'll just finish with is that I will just explain that the contribution from the Walton Centre, so I'm wanting to support the statute appeal, as Elizabeth said, not just because it is a great opportunity to celebrate nursing, but it's also a great opportunity to celebrate the importance and strength and diversity of nurse leaders. So we have agreed that every nurse on International Nurses Day at the Walton Centre will receive one of the Mary Seacole badges to celebrate nursing and also to celebrate the strength and difference. As those of you who work here will know,
Can you see it?
I enjoy a feisty nurse.
Yeah?
I like nurses that advocate for
That's
their
what you're going to get.
patients, that do the right thing, that go beyond, and that's what makes nursing the profession it is and has done to date. I really hope that this is the first of many nursing and also allied health professions lectures. We've got a great history of medical lectures and I want to build on that. So I would ask you all to consider who you feel you would like to see standing and talking to us, who you think you'd like to hear from, and come back to me by the end of May and let's see if we can make that happen. We're about to have a buffet, so reflect over the buffet, but I would just like to say a couple of thank yous. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for coming and making this first nursing lecture a great success.